You are standing in a long stone room underneath one of the most powerful cities in the world. The smell hits you before anything else. Ammonia rot. Something warm and biological that coats the back of your throat. Around you, a dozen Roman citizens sit side by side on a marble bench with holes carved into it at regular intervals, doing exactly what you think they are doing, completely in the open, talking to each other like this is perfectly normal, because for them it is. Welcome to the Foraca, the communal public latrine of ancient Rome, and it is about to destroy almost everything you thought you knew about Roman civilization. Here is the thing about Rome. We spend a lot of time talking about their roads, their aqueducts, their legal system. What we do not talk about nearly enough is what happened after dinner. What happened at the bottom of all that? Civilization. And what happened there is both more sophisticated and more disturbing than most history textbooks are willing to admit. Let us start with the basics. You need to go. Where do you go? If you live in one of Rome's Grand Insulae, the massive apartment blocks that house most of the city's population of over 1 million people, the answer depends entirely on how much money you have. The wealthy tenants on the lower floors might have access to a private latrina, a small toilet built directly over a drainage channel. But if you are a middle-class renter on the upper floors, you have two choices. You can make the long walk down to the street-level Foraca, or, especially at night, you can use a clay pot called a chamber pot, carry it to the window, and dump it into the street below. This was not considered rude, it was considered efficient. Roman law, specifically the Digesta compiled under the Emperor Justinian, actually addressed this practice. It set out rules for when and where waste could be legally discarded from upper windows, and crucially, what financial compensation passers-by could claim if they were hit. The Romans did not eliminate this behavior, they regulated it. That distinction matters enormously. Now, let us talk about the Foraca itself, because this is where Roman sanitation becomes genuinely fascinating. Public latrines were not a rarity in Rome. Archaeologists excavating Pompeii, the city frozen in time by the eruption of Mount Vesuvius in 79 AD, have identified over 40 public latrines within the city walls alone. Some of these were freestanding buildings, some were attached to bathhouses, some were built into the walls of busy market streets so that merchants and customers could use them without breaking stride. The Foraca followed a standard design, a long narrow room, stone or marble benches running along the walls, sometimes in an L shape or U shape, holes cut at regular intervals directly into the bench, each one positioned above a deep stone channel. Running water, diverted from the city's aqueduct system, flowed continuously through this channel, flushing waste away into the cloaca, Rome's underground sewer network. The Great Cloaca Maxima, the main artery of the system, was one of the oldest and most impressive engineering achievements in the ancient world, originally constructed in the 6th century BC, and still partially functioning today. So Romans had running water in their toilets. They had flush systems. They had covered sewers. By those measures, they were centuries ahead of many civilizations that followed them. But here is what the tour guides do not tell you. There was no toilet paper. Instead, attached to the bench by a short string or chain, you would find a sponge on a stick. One sponge, shared by everyone who used that toilet that day. This object even had a name in Latin. It was called the xyla spongium, or sometimes simply the tersorium. You used it, rinsed it in the small channel of water that ran along the floor in front of the bench, and you left it there for the next person. The philosopher Seneca the Younger, writing in the 1st century AD, describes a gladiator who chose to die by shoving one of these sponge sticks down his own throat rather than face the arena. Seneca considered this a remarkable act of moral will. The detail that strikes modern readers is different. It tells us these objects existed within arm's reach in Roman toilet facilities, and that their presence was so unremarkable that Seneca did not bother to explain what one was. This is the dual reality of Roman sanitation, technologically impressive in ways that genuinely staggered the ancient world, microbiologically catastrophic in ways the Romans had no framework to understand. Modern parasitological research has confirmed this in unsettling detail. A 2016 study published in the journal Parasitology, led by archaeologist Piers Mitchell of Cambridge University, analyzed preserved fecal samples from Roman archaeological sites across Britain, Germany, and the Middle East. The findings were stark. Roman populations showed high rates of intestinal parasites including whipworm, roundworm, and Trichuris trachea, and in some sites these infection rates were actually higher than in populations that preceded Rome in the same regions. Think about that for a moment. Despite the running water, despite the sewers, despite the Foraca, Romans may have had worse gut parasite burdens than the people who lived before them in those same landscapes. The reason is that shared sponge. A single contaminated tersorium, passed between dozens of users without any soap, and with only a cold water rinse, is not a hygiene tool. It is a fecal transmission machine. Every Roman who sat down after an infected person and reached for that sponge was potentially ingesting a new parasite load. The very communal design that made the Foraca efficient as waste removal made it devastating as a disease vector. Now picture your typical morning in Rome, circa 100 AD. You wake before dawn in your apartment on the third floor of an insula in the Subura district, one of Rome's most densely populated neighborhoods. You need to use the toilet. It is dark. The stairs are steep. You reach for the chamber pot under your bed instead. You carry it to the window and empty it into the alley below, then lean out and call a warning, because at least that is the polite thing to do. On your way to work, you pass an orificina, a urine collection point. A large clay jar set into an alcove in the wall. Fullers, the cloth cleaners of the ancient world, placed these jars at street corners deliberately. They needed urine. Aged human urine is rich in ammonia, and ammonia was the primary cleaning agent used to whiten and clean Roman wool garments. The fuller who owned that jar would collect it, transfer it to large stone vats, and have workers tread cloth in it with their bare feet for hours. The Emperor Vespasian, who ruled Rome from 69 to 79 AD, famously taxed the urine collection industry. When his son Titus complained that it was a degrading source of revenue, Vespasian held a coin under his nose and reportedly said, "Pecunia non olet." Money does not smell. The phrase is still quoted today. You arrive at the bathhouse, the Thermae, which in a large city like Rome was free, or nearly free, thanks to wealthy patrons who funded them as acts of civic generosity. You strip in the Apoditerium, the changing room. You move through the rooms in sequence. The Frigidarium, the cold plunge. The Tepidarium, the warm room. The Caldarium, the hot steam room. Alongside dozens of other citizens, you use the oil and the strigil, a curved bronze scraping tool, to remove sweat and dirt from your skin, because Romans did not use soap in the modern sense. Here's where it gets complicated again. The bathwater in the Thermae was not filtered. It was not chlorinated. It was not changed between every visitor. In a busy bath complex, the same water that a sick man sweated into in the morning was the water you slid into that afternoon. The historian Pliny the Elder, writing in his Naturalis Historia, describes the Roman Thermae with great admiration. He does not describe how frequently the water was replaced, because he did not think of it as relevant. He had no germ theory. No one did. And yet, the Romans were not entirely unaware that something in their environment caused illness. They had a concept called miasma, the idea that bad air rising from swamps, rotting matter, or dirty streets caused disease. It was wrong in its mechanism, but not entirely wrong in its observation. Roman engineers, guided by writers like Marcus Vitruvius Pollio, deliberately built certain settlements away from swampy ground specifically to avoid the corrupted air. What they were actually avoiding was the malaria transmitted by mosquitoes breeding in that stagnant water. The right answer for the wrong reason. Now step back from the individual morning, the individual latrine, and look at the system as a whole. The Cloaca Maxima eventually emptied into the Tiber River. The Tiber River ran directly through the center of Rome. The same river where religious ceremonies were held, where bridges were built, where the city's fishermen worked, also received the entire output of Rome's underground sewer system. The water intake for the city's aqueducts was taken upstream of the city, which shows some awareness of the problem. But downstream contamination was simply accepted as the natural order of things. Archaeologist Andrew Wilson of Oxford University has spent years studying Roman water management. His research confirms that Roman hydraulic engineering was genuinely extraordinary by any ancient measure, and it also confirms that the Romans had no understanding of waterborne pathogen transmission, and that their sewers and water systems, impressive as they were, created their own vectors for disease spread through the city's dense population. So who was the ancient Roman toilet designed for? The Foraca was a social space as much as a functional one. Romans held conversations there, business deals were struck there. Political gossip moved through those stone rooms the way it moved through bathhouses and taverns. The satirist Martial wrote poems about people who lingered too long in the public latrines for the company rather than the necessity. The essayist Plutarch mentions meeting an acquaintance at the Foraca as casually as one might mention meeting someone at a market. Defecation, in Rome, was a public act, a social act, a fundamentally collective experience. The privacy that you consider normal, the locked door, the individual stall, the total separation from other human beings during this most basic bodily function, would have seemed not just unusual to a Roman citizen. It might have seemed antisocial, suspicious, even. And one more thing before you leave the stone room under the city. Those communal latrines, for all their fascinating social use, were considered genuinely dangerous places by the Romans themselves. Not for the microbiological reasons we now understand, but for spiritual ones. Romans believed that demons and malevolent spirits lived in the sewers below the latrines, rising up through the holes in the bench. Curse tablets have been recovered from Roman drain sites, including at Bath in Britain and Ostia in Italy, inscribed with the names of enemies and dropped into the latrine openings in hopes that the underworld spirits below would carry the curse to its target. You sat above an opening to the underworld. You shared a sponge with strangers. You rinsed your hands in the same channel everyone else rinsed theirs in. And then you went to work. The Romans built one of the greatest civilizations in human history with intestinal parasites, shared cleaning sponges, and a river full of sewage running through the middle of their most important city. And here is the thing. The next time you lock a bathroom door, stand alone in a private stall, reach for a fresh square of paper, flush it all away to somewhere you will never see or smell or think about again. Remember that this experience is the aberration. For most of human history, the bathroom was not a private room. It was a room full of people you knew, and possibly some demons. That is what the Romans were doing in the bathroom.